And you want us all to mute, right? And once Jennifer starts.
Except whomever is speaking, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I have 7 o'clock. So welcome everyone, and welcome Sheila. This is the virtual plant clinic that is sponsored by the Virginia Cooperative Extension, which is made up of our 2 land-grant universities in Virginia, Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. And we are the gardeners of the Fairfax County Master Gardeners Association, and some of us may be from the Green Springs Master Gardener group. We are holding these virtual sessions because we're not able to go to the virtual plant clinics, to the plant clinics and the farmers markets and the libraries. So while we are speaking, we will be all muted. And if we have any problems with the video bandwidth, we'll ask you to close your videos so that it can be more robust. Okay. We're very happy today on October 27th to be offering this virtual plant clinic. My name is Ann Mason. I'm a Master Gardener with the Fairfax County Master Gardeners Association. And today we will have a presentation by Jennifer Zimmerman, who is also with Fairfax County. And we'll be assisted with gardeners Kathy Frame, Trish Higgins, and Renee Missel. And we'll be assisted in logistics with Zoom by Kathleen Hurley and Jane Dreyfus. And so today our session includes a presentation on herb gardening through winter. We will have a series of questions that people will respond to. And then we will, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will get to them. So with that, I'm going to welcome Jennifer to talk through herb gardens.
Hello, let me share. Here we go. Yay. Okay. So, hi, I'm Jennifer. I wanted to talk a little bit about herb gardening in the winter because it's really sad that, everything is dying outside and we just don't have the herbs. There's a way that you can preserve what you have now, a way that you can bring some things inside and even grow some things inside all the time. So how do you continue to have homegrown herbs during the winter? So there are several perennial herbs that overwinter outside. Are they always going to be in a state where you can harvest them? No. But with careful planning, you can do the harvesting now so you have a winter supply and yet not hurt the plant for the long term. The other thing right now is you can harvest and dry herbs. In general, some herbs are good for this. Some lose a lot of their flavor when you do that. There's also harvesting and freezing fresh herbs, and many of them stand up well to that. The other thing you can do is bring your herb growing indoors. And then the last is cold frames and greenhouses, how they can extend your season. So when you think of herb gardening, you think of doing it in the summer, you never realize how many are actually frost tolerant and how many prefer to be grown in cooler weather. So parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, oregano, mint, cilantro, and chives are all frost tolerant. They're not gonna keel over dead the second it gets a little bit colder. Now, things like basil, yeah, it can't take it when it's 50 degrees even. So first we're going to talk about parsley. So it's frost tolerant. It likes cool weather. So it does better in the early spring and the late in the early fall. When you harvest it, if you can harvest just the leaves if you need a little, but if you need a larger amount, you take it at the bottom of the stem and do more than 1/3. Don't do more than 1/3 of the plant at once, because then that lets the plant sustain itself, but it gives you a good harvest. And the more often you go out there and cut some, the bushier the plant will get. So it responds to being harvested. It can be dried, but you lose a lot of the flavor by doing that. So it's best done frozen. And one thing a lot of people don't know about parsley is it's a biennial. So the first year it looks great. The second year, it's going to send up a flower. And once a plant sends up a flower, it goes to seed and it's done its job. It's going to die. No matter what you do to that plant, it's not going to keep going. So the lifespan is only 2 years. So sage is a very hardy perennial. It will overwinter outside. It stays as a woody plant. It can even have some dried desiccated leaves on it that still taste like sage. So technically you can go out and harvest it in the middle of the winter. The really important thing with sage is when you first plant it, that first year you don't harvest very much at all. You want the plant to develop. You want it to put all its energy into developing the root system in the plant itself rather than leaves. After the second year, you can pick the leaves as needed. If it gets too woody and elongated, you can cut some of it out, but don't do too much. Again, no more than 1/3. And for the last harvest in the fall, before it goes dormant again, don't cut it all out. Leave something there living so it can regenerate itself in the spring. You can either freeze it or dry it, and the plant itself will last 3 to 5 years, and they suggest after that starting with a new plant just for better production. So rosemary is perennial in zone 7 and higher, and you're to bring it indoors if it's in a cooler zone. Rosemary has been very difficult in this area for the last 10 years. They die off extremely easily. So I've started putting mine in a pot, only growing it in a pot and bringing the pot indoors. The key to rosemary is it needs well-drained soil, but it is not drought tolerant. So it needs to be wet. If a rosemary plant that is dry is a rosemary plant that is dead. So it's got to have that just right zone, and it needs extremely bright light, the brightest light that you can give it. So also with it, the more you harvest, the bushier it will get. In temperate zones, it actually grows into a bush, not here. And again, don't harvest more than 1/3 of the bush at the time. It does not grow well from seed, but it does readily root. And the reason you want to plant it in a pot and move the pot in and out is because it hates being transplanted. So you don't want to shock it with a transplant, try to bring it indoors and then expect it to live. So it can also be frozen or dried. Thyme is another hardy perennial. It can overwinter in pots or the ground. Or you can overwinter it by cutting a cutting and rooting it and then bringing it inside for the winter, and then take it back out in the spring. You harvest the leaves as you need it, and as it starts to flower, when it looks like it's going to flower, you take off the whole top layer, but you want there to be at least 5 inches of growth on the bottom so it can sustain itself. And it can be dried or frozen. And again, the lifespan is 3 to 5 years. So oregano is a hardy perennial, but it prefers warmth and it readily reseeds itself. So even though the plant might not make it, the original plant, it's reseeding itself. So, and it doesn't like to be planted in the same place that like rosemary does, or the ones that like to be a little bit wetter. It doesn't like to be wet at all. So it needs to be in its own area that's a little bit drier. For best harvest, you want to let it grow to 5 inches and then keep it trimmed to maintain a dense form. It can be dried or frozen, and the lifespan is 3 to 5 years. So mint, a very vigorous perennial. I advise not planting it in the ground unless you want it to be in the middle of your lawn, because it spreads very, very easily. So it likes evenly moist soil. It's even kind of a boggy plant. It likes it soggy and wet. So it tolerates continuous harvesting. You also want to prune it heavily before it flowers, otherwise it'll, and in general, when herbs go to flower, the taste of the herb leaf itself changes. It becomes bitter or not as good. So you want to stop them from going to flower if you want the best culinary taste. You can bring mint inside for the winter. It can be dried or frozen, and plants go dormant in the winter and they have a really long lifespan. So mine every year in a pot, like it disappears. There's nothing there. There's not 1 ounce of stem, and it comes back. So, and next is cilantro. It's an annual that only grows in cool weather. So you think of it, you want it to go with your tomatoes in the middle of summer. Well, it doesn't like the heat of the middle of the summer. So really you can only be successful growing a crop in the spring and the fall, and it dies off in the summer. It's actually so cool weather tolerant that it'll tolerate several frosts before it dies. It prefers an evenly moist soil, and you can harvest the leaves like parsley. You cut at the base of the stem no more than 1/3 of the time, or just do the leaves themselves. It does not do well dried. It loses a lot of its flavor. It's best preserved frozen. But what it does do well dried is if you want coriander, the seeds that are coriander are the seeds of the cilantro plant. So when it goes to seed, you can harvest those seeds and dry them. And the last successful plant indoors is chives. It grows really well in cool weather. You can grow it inside year round. When it gets too hot, it may go dormant. It also tolerates a lot light frost well. You harvest the leaves, and yes, those long things are leaves, they're not stems, by just cutting at the base. And you harvest from the outside. So you cut the outside edges and let it regenerate from the inside. It's best stored in the freezer, and it has a very long lifespan. It will produce better if you regularly divide the clump that you have. So it is a bulb. It's part of the onion family. So like all bulbs, they prefer room. So if after like the second year, if you divide up the plant you have into 2 or 4, those individual plants will produce more for you in the future. So when I think of herbs indoor, basil always comes up because basil is my favorite and I want to have it in the house. And the reality is it does not grow well indoors due to the temperature requirements. So it prefers, even at night, never to be below 70 degrees, and it thrives at 80 to 90 degrees. And it cannot tolerate 40 degrees and below. It starts to have die-off problems at 50. So you harvest it whenever you're needed, and you pinch plants to encourage the bushy growth. And again, with this, the more you harvest, the better it produces. And this one definitely, once it flowers, it changes taste. So it's best stored frozen, and it has a really short lifespan. It's an annual. People are trying to grow it inside as a houseplant, and that's not the way basil works. So I'm hoping this helps people realize that some plants are designed to go long-term and others aren't. Their sole goal is to flower and seed, and then it's done. So herbs that to harvest, hang, and dry. So when you're harvesting, you clip and you hang it in a cool, dry place with good circulation. Once the leaves, if you touch them, if they crumble, then they're ready to store. And you want to store them in airtight containers. If they're exposed to oxygen, they lose flavor. And if you store them before the leaves crumble, they can mold on you. You want to make sure they're really well dried. And annuals like the basil, the entire plant can be harvested at the end of the growing stage. Just pull it up by its roots and hang it. If they're perennials, you want to make sure you leave enough that the plant can sustain itself. So sage, rosemary, thyme, oregano, mint, and coriander do okay dried. And herbs that you want to harvest and freeze to preserve the flavor. First, you clean and dry the fresh herbs, get the harvestable portion, so take the stems out. You can leave them whole or chop them up. If you take an ice cube tray or silicone molds, you can fill each well with the herb leaves, and then you cover it completely with either water or olive oil. You want to make sure nothing sticks out because it'll get freezer burnt and not taste good. Olive oil preserves better than the water does. Water is probably better for mint because most mint flavorings aren't paired with an oil base when cooking. They're more for like zesty things that are water based. So I usually do mine with olive oil. And you want to pick an oil that doesn't have a strong overtone to it. So an olive oil is nice because it won't distort the taste as much. And after freezing for 2 hours, you can take the cubes and place them in a labeled bag. They don't have to live in the ice cube trays. So, and then every time you want to do a soup or, you know, add a little something to your chicken, you just take one out and throw it in the pan. So parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, oregano, basil, and cilantro are all herbs that do well freezing. And if you want to try to grow herbs indoor, you have to have lights. Most herbs need 12 to 16 hours of light a day to grow well. So just placing them in a southern facing window is not going to be enough. If you do try that, the pot needs to be rotated often because they're just not getting enough sunlight. And you also risk, if your windows are not insulated, that the microclimate there will be too cold. So other things that you can do to help grow herbs indoor or other plants is you can purchase a professional setup. You can fit current fixtures you have with grow lights, which I've done both of these things. I've done all three of these things. And then you can buy a simple fixture and place it over an area you already have. So these all-inclusive setups have really exploded during COVID. You know, it's kind of like homesteading. Everybody wants to produce food. So on the left, if you remember Arrow Gardens, you know, there was just one simple Arrow Garden. They have branched out. Now they've got the farm 24 extra large that they've got tomatoes in. Of course, all of these things are out of stock, so you can't get them. The one on the right is a growing stand that you can use for seedlings, or you can use to maintain your house plants or plants that you had outside. But again, they're expensive. So what I did was, when I went to my class on indoor gardening, the thing that they pointed out was use what you already have. So I just took LED light bulbs and put them in my kitchen pendants. And guess what? My entire peninsula is now green. My husband isn't very happy about it, but I can keep an eye on everything. I see when things are going bad. I walk from the stove over there, pick the herb, walk back. It's really made a difference for me and I have all the other setups too, but this is the one that I know always gets attention that I can watch. So you can make your own fixture. You can buy the bulbs themselves. This is an LED bulb, and you can buy the component to put it in. So both of these were purchased off of Amazon. You get the component, you put the bulb in it. It has a clip. You can clip it over what area you have your plants in. You plug it in. You plug it into a timer. All of my stuff is plugged into a timer except for the pendant lights, and you can decide how much to give it. So for home use, the two types of lighting that I'm going to discuss are just the T5 and the LED. T5 is the higher output fluorescence. They have lower heat emissions than your regular fluorescent that you would get at the hardware store. That's important because you want to be able to place your plants close to your lights. If the lights have a lot of heat, if you place your plants too close, they will scorch, they will burn, it will hurt the plant. The plant needs as much light as it can get it for growing conditions. So the closer you can get to it, the more growth you will get. So the other form of lighting is high intensity density lighting. And it's only used for big home use and not usually with vegetables and houseplants. The only drawback of the fluorescent T5, it's not as energy efficient as LED, but it makes up for that in cost. So the other kind that you can use that you can see everywhere, and the prices are coming down, so it's helpful, is LED lights. Now they have very low heat emission. You can really get them up close. They shouldn't scorch the plants. It's the most energy efficient and it lasts longer. You don't have to replace the bulbs as often. It's really expensive. And it's hard to shop for them because you see a unit and it tells you how many LEDs it has. It doesn't tell you how much area it covers. So you want to look at the wattage of the unit, and the rule of thumb is 30 watts per square foot. So there are LED lights out there that are $170 for the unit. There are LED lights out there that are $25 for the unit. If you don't look at that, you've just got this fancy bulb that might grow one plant. So you have to be careful when you shop. So, and the last thing is, if you want to expand and have a more controllable setting, the most controllable, of course, is a greenhouse, because they can be completely temperature controlled with automatic vents, electric or gas heaters and fans. Or a step down from that is a cold frame. And if you get a real cold frame, they have hinges in them that are temperature regulated. So when it becomes warm inside, a product inside the hinge expands and it opens. So it will vent and not allow it to get so hot that mildew and heat damage occurs. And you don't need electricity for that. So you can also build your own cold frame and install those kind of hinges, but cold frames still, like growing inside, it needs to be monitored. Greenhouse doesn't need to be monitored quite as much. So that was my presentation on growing herbs. Are there any questions?
Well, that was a terrific presentation. I will start off the questions. There's nothing in the chat box, but I'll start off a question. You mentioned all the flowers. Is there ever a use for the flowers of any of these herbs?
Some people, like chive flowers, are edible. I know that for sure. Some people make tea with it. I was looking at this just as for the culinary uses for the herbs. Nothing but chives was mentioned as edible.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Thank you. We only have a small crowd, so does anybody have any questions? If you do, unmute yourself.
Jennifer, when would you recommend, if we're going to over winter time, what's the best time to like harvest? Should we wait to just right before the first frost and then just harvest all of it?
Yeah. If you're only gonna, you can take a third now. And I feel like I'm in a waiting game. They say it's gonna frost this weekend. So I would probably take it now and do it. But if you want to only do a third and then take maybe another quarter if it doesn't frost this weekend, you just want to leave the plant with enough that it can regenerate.
And you said I can just put that into ice cube trays and oil and freeze it, and it will be good all through the winter. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can do, and you can do your own custom mixes. You can put what fresh, look at your recipes and what fresh herbs you would put in your spaghetti sauce, put it all in one cube, and then label those spaghetti cubes, and more work is done. And you can also control the amount of oil that goes in.
that's